There you go. And admit all. Alrighty. I think that should be everyone admitted now. I think everyone's connecting. And oh, more people are just coming in. All right, everyone. Hello, welcome to Film Financing for Social Impact Entertainment webinar. We have a very exciting we have a very exciting lineup of panelists to speak about this topic, and we are all very excited to have everyone here. Let me just admit a few more people kind of pending right now. Oh gosh, so many people. Exciting. All right. So welcome everyone. Let's start off with some housekeeping matters first. We ask that everyone please stay muted so that you can hear what our panelists have to say. And yeah, just please make sure to stay muted. If you do have questions, we will have a Q&A at the end. Make sure to submit all of your questions to the chat, and then at the end, we will go through them and pick the ones that we find interesting and submit them to our panelists to answer. For viewing purposes, we suggest that everyone put their Zoom on speaker mode so that our panelists do not just get lost in gallery mode. And I think one last thing is that we will have a recording of this webinar provided to everyone who has registered. That will be sent out later this afternoon after the webinar. Let's see, let me admit everyone. And if anyone comes in late, I will be mentioning this again later. But yes, okay. All right, let's start off with some introductions. So first we have Nina Amiri, the founder and principal of Amiri Law PC. Nina Amiri is a well-known and respected attorney with 20 years of experience in the entertainment industry. Opening up her own law firm back in 2019, Nina has dedicated her practice to supporting creatives in the entertainment industry, providing guidance through the deal-making process, advocating for their rights as artists, and protecting their creative work from being exploited. As the founder of Amiri Law PC, Nina understands how important it is to stay on top of an industry that is constantly changing, and she is passionate about making sure filmmakers and creatives alike have all the tools that they need to share their vision with the world and are properly protected along every step of the way. Next, we have Rick Davis, the managing partner of LOHAS Advisors. With extensive experience in the environmental and social impact sector, serving in strategy, business development, company funding, and project financing roles, Rick Davis's professional career spans legal, technology, financial, and entrepreneurial pursuits, with leadership roles in venture-backed and publicly traded companies, advising CEOs, developers, and governments around the world. As managing partner of LOHAS, Rick provides capital activation solutions to impact investors, fund managers, company leaders, social impact entertainment producers, and grant makers, delivering structures and strategies that help convert philanthropic contributions into tax-advantaged impact investments. Lastly, we have William Nix, partner at LOHAS. William Nix has extensive experience in the entertainment, media, sports, and intellectual property fields as a producer, corporate executive, investment banker, and attorney. He is a thought leader in the social impact entertainment, or SIE, field, who helps lead LOHAS's SIE practice, supporting investors with socially and environmentally impactful entertainment ventures. In addition, Will is a member of the Producers Council of the Producers Guild of America, a founder of its Social Impact Entertainment Task Force, and a member of its Diversity, Education, International, and Documentary committees. He has also co-developed and helped launch the SIE Society, on which he serves as founding member and co-executive director. Will's work as a producer has encompassed traditional media and multiple content delivery platforms, technologies, and genres, and his passion is to inspire positive social change through all forms of media in partnership with individuals, organizations, and businesses with similar goals and objectives. All right. With that, I think we can now move on to a very brief PowerPoint presentation.
Kyle, I'll need you to let me, oh, there, did you, says it's disabled. You may just have to make me a co-host or something in that vein in order for me to be able to present.
Let's see. Let me make you co-host right now.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, by the way. This is a great turnout, and we hope this information is going to be impactful for you and your projects.
Okay. Go ahead and try now. I think you should be able to share screen.
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay.
Those are the minor ones. Yeah. Where are all of these separated?
I think someone, let me make sure everyone is muted.
I'm trying to be as creative as possible so that way I can make sure it works for today. Oh, you got it? We close.
So
Oh, sorry. Rick, can you quickly unmute? There you go. There you go.
okay, there we go. So can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
I
Well,
think
nice
you might be in presenter mode. You might need to full screen it.
Hold on, let me see. I actually had it in presenter mode, but it may not be what you're seeing on your end. Can you see it in presenter mode, or is it coming across as notes?
It's coming across as two screens. There's the PowerPoint and there you go.
All right, perfect.
Now it is, yeah.
Sorry about that. Well, nice to speak with everyone. This is just a brief presentation, but I thought it might be helpful to sort of set the stage of what we're talking about today. I'm going to go through it very quickly, but with the idea that ideally it provides a little context for everyone, and then we can get to the Q&A, which should be the meat of the matter. So we're talking today about alternative fundraising strategies for social impact entertainment. And the important aspect here is that, things have gotten easier in this regard. We can now more easily, as a producer, independent filmmaker, raising funds, more easily access tax deductible philanthropic funding to finance your productions. And at LOHAS, we're very focused on this sort of SI world, using things like donor advised funds and unlocking foundation grants and the like. And our focus is really helping sort of de-risk the project using these kinds of funds, and ideally having that used to attract other investors. So just as some context here, if you're not familiar with donor advised funds, there's over $250 billion sort of hidden away in donor advised funds in this country. Donor advised funds are the most popular philanthropic giving tool in the US. The inflows outmatch the outflows every year, and by next year we'll have 300 billion in them. The key aspect here is they're anonymous, and so you have to ask. There's also many billions of dollars in private foundations, private family foundations and the like, that they must grant out by law every year. But the reality is most DAF donors, owners, and foundation grant makers have no idea that their funds can be used to invest in your productions. It's up to you to inform them of such. So I will say that most DAF sponsors, donor advised fund sponsors, the parties that own these bodies of donor funds, won't allow investing in entertainment productions, but we will. So it doesn't matter if the parties you speak to or who have their DAF at Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard or wherever it may be, we can move their money over and have it invested in your production. And with regard to grants, you know, it really can be a powerful tool to, as I said, de-risk the project, attract other investors. But typically it requires a fiscal sponsor program. A lot of you may be familiar with that concept in the entertainment space. What we found some years back is that sort of the traditional fiscal sponsor programs really didn't provide all the capabilities and support that producers needed with their fundraising efforts. So we actually went and created what I think of as sort of a hybrid fiscal sponsor program to cater to the needs of SIE producers. And I'm not going to go through this slide, but the short of it is, as we laid out what we're doing that's different, is that we have a lot more flexibility, both on the kinds of funds that can be raised and the manner in which they can be raised, and also how they can be deployed, specifically investment of those funds and signaling to other investors that you've raised investment capital. And additionally, and perhaps most importantly, we provide a lot of hands-on support to support your fundraising activities, in the sense that we are talking with the donors and grantors you identify when they have questions, when they're trying to figure out how to make that work. We have a lot of experience dealing with those kinds of things, and we can step in and be that, you know, other member of your fundraising team, not the tip of the spear, but the support group to work with this, you know, these kinds of philanthropic contributors. This is you know, just exemplary. By no means is this the only way to finance, but the real point of this is to lay out how philanthropic support can play a role in your film financing, specifically at the early stages, to cover some of the riskiest parts when you're trying to get it off the ground. And ideally, it allows other funds to flow, whether those are tax credits and ultimately production equity, and you know, on down the line, where it becomes the catalyst that makes the production less risky, so that other people feel comfortable with investing. In fact, the very same parties that make philanthropic gifts to support your production can be the ones that then later invest, because now they're ready to have it invested out of their own portfolio, because the production has, you know, gotten to a stage where they feel more comfortable making that investment. And the last tip of the arrow talks about impact campaigns, which we believe can be a really important component of entertainment productions in this area. So, you know, what is SIE? You know, it's not necessarily documentaries or overt messaging. These are sort of two extreme, you know, cases that I have a tendency to reference. You know, was taken a star-driven action film, or was it really raising awareness about human trafficking? You know, was Avatar just a sci-fi blockbuster, or was it actually a film championing environmental conservation and indigenous rights? I mean, there are a lot of ways to think about social impact within the entertainment space. It's not just the overt, in-your-face, as my colleague here always says. You know, there are ways to sneak the spinach into the popcorn, where you're actually leaving people with some inspiration and some education, and, you know, ideally some new thoughts on things, even if that's not why they attended it in the first place. So we get asked a lot about, okay, well, what is social impact entertainment in this regard? You know, how does it qualify? We are not an arbiter of what is or is not impact. I always say impact is in the eye of the donor or grantor, meaning the parties out there that would be contributing to your production through donation or grant money. You know, find those parties that care about or are passionate about what that element is in your production. Could be as simple as the location, or the filmmaker, or the cast, or an embedded message, or whatever it may be. You know, find those parties. And I'll add that wealthy parties want to participate. They want to earn that producer's credit. They want to walk on the red carpet and be part of the premiere. But entertainment investing is very tricky for investors that haven't done it in the past. It'll often be a new undertaking and perceived as too risky. So, you know, the idea here is to give them a pathway to participate without putting their portfolio funds at risk, at least initially. You know, give them a way to get in the door and help you get things started and become part of that without actually having to reach into their bank account. So this is largely the, you know, second to last slide here. These are the questions that you should be asking when you're pitching your production. You know, for, you know, always, you know, you want to be asking people, do you have a donor advised fund or a private foundation? If it's a DAF, you know, asking them, hey, did you know your DAF could be invested, your DAF funds could be invested in my production? Doesn't matter where you currently have them. And if it's a foundation, did you know that your grant making, not the investment side of the foundation, but the grant making, the grants that have to go out the door by law every year could be used to invest in your production. And if the foundation wants some of those returns, in case it turns into be a big hit, we can structure it so that it's a recoverable grant and that money can flow back to the foundation. The important thing to ask, though, or the important thing to note, though, is if you don't ask, neither you nor they will ever know this. Because most of the DAF owners and most of the foundations have no idea. So it's incumbent for you to ask these questions and educate them. And you tell them, you know, earn a producer's credit using your DAF or using your foundation funds. Most of them have no idea they could be doing that. And once someone signals interest or asks a question about how they can do that, you know, that's when you drop us a line. That's when you let us know, hey, I have a prospective grantor, prospective donor. They have a bunch of questions. You know, we'll talk to them. We'll talk to their attorneys or their financial advisors, and we'll facilitate those donations or grants to support your productions. That's what we do. And then ultimately we can invest those contributions into your production. That's the real end goal here, is to support that film financing. And this is a downloadable brochure on our website that you can access. But you know, hopefully this sort of backdrop has been helpful. And so Nina, why don't you? I'm going to stop sharing this. Why don't we bounce over to you and get to some actual Q&A.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. It was a lot of information thrown at us. So, you know, I think kind of the number one question is, how do you even begin this conversation? Because I think that, you know, there are probably a lot of investors that are not necessarily familiar with impact investing specifically for films. So is there a approach that our clients and colleagues can tailor to start having this conversation?
Will, do you want to talk a little bit as independent film producers doing things in the impact space, one of the repositories folks could go to start? Oh, Will, you're muted.
Let me back up a little bit and backfill like a little bit on this in terms of like how we came to be working together. So my perspective on this whole area is as a producer and looking at this through multiple channels. And particularly because of the importance of social impact entertainment, it's its own particular area. And I found it was difficult to get the financing that was needed to underwrite different productions. And so I started looking at different ways, and that's how Rick and I first came to work together. And part of it is also relates to work we are doing when we created the SIE Society. And I know just by looking at a number of names on the screen that many of you are members, but just to cross promote for a second there, it's a free membership organization that is focused on social impact entertainment and storytelling in all media platforms. So even though today we're talking about film, it certainly would apply to television and games and theaters and other things. And we at LOHAS have worked in that capacity to support those sorts of productions. Another thing, just as an overview to this, I'd also like to point out that this is an area that you not only can look at this in terms of how you support an individual production, but also sort of enterprise support. So I think some of this sort of effort that's invested in creating fiscal sponsorship programs and entities can be cross-collateralized in different ways by using the entities that are created for slate funding, using them for financing companies that are involved in this area, across the board. And also, I think probably an example, and one of the reasons I put it into the chat, a great case history for you all to be aware of if you're not already, is what Ava DuVernay did with her Array organization, and specifically with the financing of her film Origin, and that is based upon a book that she had optioned and then developed into a dramatic series. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it just in and of itself. But also, if you look at the at the link that I put in the chat, the Harvard Business School has done a case study about it that kind of runs through a lot of what we're talking about here today, specifically in terms of how you activate what Rick put up in the slides and actually turn it into a production and even a series of productions by working with both the philanthropic and the nonprofit community, as well as the for-profit community, the more equity kind of approach that producers take to it. So that's just sort of an overlay and a backdrop to my personal perspective as to how all this fits together and the pieces of the puzzle align.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that, Nina, going back to your question of how to start, become a member of the SIE Society, learn what others are doing. There's a lot of educational material there in the vein of what Will's talking. And then the very simple thing is you don't do anything differently than you're already doing to some extent, meaning it's often the very same parties you're already speaking with about supporting your film. It's just asking those questions I mentioned at the end of the presentation so that you alert them to the fact that there are other ways for them to support your work. It can be scary to be an investor in an entertainment production, but it doesn't mean they don't want to participate. They don't want to see it get on screen. You're giving them through this another way for them to support using money that they may have already set aside and had no idea they could be using to support your productions. You're alerting them to that fact that there's another way for folks to participate.
I was wondering if there's any geographic limitation on where the donors can reside. There's a lot of money, quite frankly, all over the world. So are we focusing on US or international here?
No, we can accept money from any donor or grantor anywhere in the world, and we can deploy, as investment capital or otherwise, money to any production anywhere in the world. I mean, there may be some subtle exceptions of North Korea and Iran and the like, but for the most part, money can be received and deployed. The one caveat I'd make is, philanthropic tax laws are different everywhere in the world, and so the benefit someone gets for a philanthropic contribution in France is different than the U.S. But no, we're very capable of supporting productions in anywhere in the world.
Are there any minimums?
No minimums, no maximums. There's no limitations on that. I mean, you want to find donors that are making meaningful contributions, probably. I mean, that should be the goal, like with anything you're already doing. But there's no low end. And if you have a large group of parties that want to participate in smaller amounts, all of that's possible.
Okay. You talked a little bit about how philanthropic funds de-risk a production, and I really like the chart that you laid out. I was wondering if maybe you can just kind of go into, how you've seen filmmakers be successful with presenting in the development stage, because that is obviously the most risky time to come on board to a film project. And so, is that chart something that maybe they could use to kind of show potential donors, this is kind of the trajectory that we're looking at? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk that, or Will, you can. You have more experience on the actual producer side. If you want to start, I'm happy to add.
Yeah, with the de-risking that you're talking about is really very much related to the like a donor advised fund that the donors have already taken their tax deduction. So if they're putting money into the development phase or any phase, where the impact campaign at the end of it or whatever, in that instance, there isn't a risk. The only risk is maybe they don't get a return on investment if it goes back upstream to the donor advised funds. They never reclaim the money themselves. It always sits in the DAF. But that is a major advantage to it, is that they can basically get in the game, as Rick was talking about, and then take it from there.
Right.
Yeah, and I would add that the strategy of philanthropic funding early and investment capital late or later is a good one for investors. That, you know, once again, it's this combination of, I want to see your production on screen because it's important to me. That cause is something that I'm passionate about. But I also recognize, you know, the financial risk involved. So why not use my risk-free capital on the early side, meaning capital I've already set aside for tax purposes. And then later I'll get the production to a stage, ideally, or the, you know, producer gets it to a stage where that same, could be that very same party, doesn't have to be, but could be that very same party now goes, okay, now I feel comfortable actually writing the direct investment check out of my, you know, out of my own portfolio, because it's gotten to a point where it's far de-risked. And you're also able to demonstrate not just to them, but to other investors that you've had investors in the deal at that point. You can say, hey, look, you know, this is the amount of actual investment capital we've raised along the way.
One question that has popped up a couple times here in the chat is, how exactly is LOHAS compensated for the advisory services it's providing?
Yeah, I mean, it depends whether it's that, you know, someone's using our donor advised fund or one of these fiscal sponsor programs, but we're paid based on a fee based on assets under management in the philanthropic vehicle. So in the DAF or in the nonprofit. That's our primary income source. You know, it averages, for, if we're investing the money, it averages about 2% annually of the invested capital. Or
So
the
similar to how
And I would add
so
to that.
similar how to a traditional financial advisor would work.
Yeah, you know, very much so, but
Okay.
just on the philanthropic funds.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's segregated into its own account. And
Yeah.
then you take the 2%, which I assume that's industry standard.
Well, actually,
it's far lower than industry standard. Will maybe about.
Oh, wow.
I'm just trying to get in here. The traditional way people are familiar with the term fiscal sponsor is basically a pass through of cash, where you have a nonprofit, it's a 501c3, but you have a for-profit that wants to take in money that's only available to a charitable entity. But what the LOHAS system that's set up enables, as the chart that Rick put up said, it enables you to bring in crypto, real estate, art, and any number of other sorts of assets that can be assessed and evaluated in terms of their value. The norm in the industry, you know, for traditional, just ordinary pass-through fiscal sponsorship programs is somewhere between 5 and 8%, sometimes even higher than that. The LOHAS system, it is strictly a pass-through. You know, money comes in, it goes right back out of the system. The 501c3 obligation is fulfilled. That is simply a 4% sort of thing. If there's a hybrid where, as Rick said, that there's an investment of assets, because sometimes, you know, people aren't ready to deploy the funds, and therefore it sits there for a while. That's a different fee that goes with that. But that's the basic construct, and then there's an initial setup fee just to create the fiscal sponsorship program. But the reason I was mentioning before that I think it amortizes best if you are doing this not only for a single film or a single project, but if you're setting it up and you do multiple projects, so you have a slate or there's an enterprise investment that goes with that, that all of this makes even more sense where it can be used again and again with segregated accounts. As everything is, the bookkeeping is all separated line by project or enterprise, but it's the same entity that's being used on a repeat basis.
So, you know, a couple of times you both have mentioned fiscal sponsors. Are you talking about just partnering with a nonprofit, or what type of entities are you referring to when you talk about fiscal sponsors?
We establish a nonprofit program for every one of our fiscal sponsor program clients, where it becomes like a sidecar to their production, or as Will noted, maybe it's a slate of productions or a series of productions that allow them to be able to proactively solicit philanthropic funds from any source. Could be donor advised funds, foundation grants, direct contributions in the way Will was just saying, that we can then take and deploy into their production, where the returns, if there are financial returns, if there's an investment component of that deployment, actually flow back to the nonprofit so they can use it to invest in the next production, in their series of production. So it's a continuing nonprofit vehicle there to support the mission associated with the various string of productions.
Awesome. So you also mentioned that the returns can potentially go back into the fund.
Well, they can go back into the nonprofit vehicle so that you can deploy them, to support your next production. So that's sort of the point Will's making. We can set these up for individual productions, but they even have more power when hey, I'm a film producer. This is not going to be my first and last, impactful production. I have a plan to do the next 3 to 5 to 10 to whatever it is. And we set up one nonprofit entity that allows you to raise philanthropic funds. And if there are returns from that philanthropic entity where it's invested in that production and returns come back, then that money's there to support, the subsequent production. I mean, that's the idea, is that, it continues to be there supporting your work.
And have you found in your work that most of the CPAs that are working with, the donors are familiar with this structure and how it works, or do you have to do a lot of education? Because, for me, I came across this, I learned about this very recently, which was surprising to me because I am in this space, and so I'm kind of wondering from your experience, has there been a little bit of education with the CPAs for some of these donors?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're generous to say a little education. I mean, this is, as I quickly noted in the presentation, virtually no one knows they can be doing this.
Right.
For starters, if we just take one vehicle, donor advised funds, virtually no one allows who runs donor advised funds allows their donors to use their DAF in this way. So it would never have been raised to them. So it's incumbent upon parties to raise these questions with their prospective, financial supporters here, so that you can do that. I will note DAFs are also anonymous. There is no database. There is no way to find a donor who has a DAF or how much money they have in their DAF. It is the only way you do it is by asking that individual yourself, do you have a donor advised fund? And if so, were you aware you could be investing that money in my production? Because chances are, if they do have a DAF, they were not aware they could be investing it. And so, nor are their financial advisors, which was your question, or their CPAs or their lawyers, because this is just not a well-known area. And so, it sort of puts the producer, the party out raising money for the film, in the position of not just fundraiser, but educator, to educate those parties. And that is why I said, with regard to what we do, is that we do take an active role. So if a party that we're working with, a client says, hey, I'm talking to this financial advisor, he said he has 5 parties, that he represents that have donor advised funds or have foundations that would love to do this, but they have a bunch of questions. That's when we would get involved. We're not a placement agent, we're not identifying donors, we're not identifying grantors, but when you do identify them and they have questions, and they will have questions, because it's not something they've done 5 times before. Chances are it's the first time they've ever done something like this. We're there to answer their questions, get them the documentation they need, all that kind of thing.
And I'd also jump in and say that this is a little bit different. Some people may be more used to dealing with family offices or foundations that are a little more public. But a lot of what we're talking about here is applicable in terms of how this all can work. It's just that, as Rick identified in the beginning, there's $250 billion in donor advised funds as a potential area to tap. And a lot of people just aren't as aware of this, particularly in the entertainment and media space. And it's what we're really trying to shine a light on it. In terms of CPAs, for example, there are CPA associations, including right here in California, Texas, New York, other places do have groups that focus on the entertainment industry, and we are actually trying to reach out to them and sort of share our expertise in this approach, in the hope that it'll go back to clients, and same with business managers as well.
So, I mean, my takeaway from this is if I'm a filmmaker I think my first task is to really make a list of financial advisors that I know. Would that be a good jumping point?
Hmm.
Yeah,
And
I
then
mean,
asking if they're familiar with this vehicle, because it sounds like a lot of them just aren't.
that absolutely is the case. You know, if you think they're the kinds of parties that would be interested potentially in supporting entertainment productions, chances are they don't know that this is a pathway to do it. And interesting enough, for financial advisors, it can be particularly interesting for the reason you actually said earlier, Nina, which is financial advisors get paid often on some percentage of assets under management in the portfolio of their clients. What we're
Exactly.
talking about is actually taking money outside of the portfolio of their clients. So,
Right.
way for them to use money that they probably weren't making money on anyway, and allow them to use that money as their fund money and not dig into the portfolio funds that that advisor may be more protective of. So it's a way to allow those clients to scratch that entertainment itch, without actually having to dip into the money that the advisor, you know, is paid upon.
Excellent. Yeah. Um, so is there kind of an average capital raise that you guys have seen? Is it all over the place? Um,
It
what's kind of like a good, I guess, starting point for someone that, is interested in social impact advising, but doesn't want to make too big of a jump?
Yeah, I mean, you are correct there. It is all over the map. Most of our hands-on support is involving, you know, major donors or grantors and helping them get over the, you know, educate and get over the finish line. But we also have clients that are doing things like crowdfunding campaigns where they have a donate option, and, you know, where that could have anybody, you know, offer a few bucks and contribute to getting a production on screen. So it really is all over the map. I mean, on the upper end, it tends to be single digit millions, not tens or hundreds of millions type of thing. But
Right.
you know, meaningful money is being conveyed towards impactful ventures, and you know, it's just incumbent upon parties to know to ask about what's in that other pocket.
Are there funds that target underrepresented groups, for example, my ethnic minorities or LGBTQ communities? Have you seen anything like that?
Are we talking in the production side, on the film finance side?
No,
I,
like actual. If you are an underrepresented group, how do you identify donors that are specifically interested in those projects? Either ethnic minorities,
yeah.
LGBTQ, or,
It's a
disabled.
great question, and you know, I can't look at all the questions popping up on the chat. I'm seeing like little quick flashes, but one prevalent theme that I think I've gathered is, okay, where are these DAFs and things and like that? Where are the donors that care about those things that I care about? I wish there were a magic bullet. There's not. I will take each of those separately. For donor advised funds, as I mentioned earlier, they are anonymous. Like, we run a donor advised fund and we can't share any information on our donors, whether, you know, how much money they have or otherwise. And that's exactly the same for the hundreds of other DAF sponsors in the country. And so there is no top down approach. It is very much find the donor. And there is no
Right.
like database to go to. You literally, while you're talking to that party you hope will support your film, you have to also ask them, by the way, do you have a donor advised fund, or are you part of a private family foundation such that you could support? There is no magic bullet here. It's purely up to you.
Yeah.
And on
Right.
the, I'm sorry, go on, Will.
I was just going to jump in at a different thing, because that a lot of people ask, what qualifies for impact and whatever, and also social impact entertainment. Two things on that. One, I put into the chat sort of a metrics or rubrics about impact and how that sort of campaigns are run. As that may be some response to that. The other thing is that in terms of what qualifies for social impact entertainment, I mean, one of the things that we've looked at Lenses is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and stories that tend to center around those sort of things. And the reason for doing that is simply that it's a little bit difficult as to how you tag something and says, okay, this is social impact entertainment. And that seems to be a relatively universal lexicon that is being used around the world. One of the key things is when you look at this in terms of, well, do I fit into the social impact entertainment lens, and how does that all work? Looking at the Sustainable Development Goals is one of the ways, at least as an entry point into that review and analysis.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And the second point I was going to make, which ties nicely into that, is on the grant front. While you can't do any sort of analytics around donors with DAFs, you have to just sort of ask the question. With foundations, you actually can, because foundations are publicly listed, and you can look at foundations and determine where they're making their grants, and ideally do some searches around what foundations have supported the kinds of things that I'm doing. Now, many of them probably haven't supported them through grant funding like we're advocating here, but at least you can determine sort of missions and things of that nature of foundations and find out, hey, where do they align with the things that I'm, trying to put on screen, that, sort of ideally serves as a bridge for you to have that first conversation where you reach out and go, hey, I saw your foundation has this kind of mission, so has stated that I'd seen it supported these kinds of things. I'd love to chat with you about my production that talks about or raises awareness about or educates on that as well. And then you also give them the ability to contribute using their grant funding versus just their investment side, their endowment side.
And a lot of the times, some of the things that we work with are hybrids of that. And one of the things that, particularly whether you're talking about an impact-oriented fund or a foundation, is if they hear the words ROI, that there's actually a potential, for recoupable grants. That is something that incentivizes a number of these organizations to want to lean into. And sometimes there are it's sort of split, where there may be something that is put in, with the idea of an equity or return on investment that goes with it, but also there may be certain things like impact campaigns that may not in and of themselves be as susceptible to a return on investment kind of approach, but and that a foundation or a grantor will therefore say, well, okay, well, I'll give you a grant for that part of it. And for the other part of what you're working on, I want to do that as a recoupable investment that I'm making in it as an organization. So this sort of blending is part of what we do, is to sort of figure out what's the mix there. How does that these different channels work? And it's one of the things that, again, that is very different from the sort of fiscal sponsorship programs that we set up from compared with the more pass-through sort of orientation.
We've talked a lot about film today, and I saw some questions come through in the chat about how you would work with a television series.
It's the same. I mean, for us, as Will noted earlier, we are not beholden to any one entertainment medium. Could be television, could be film, could be live theater, and a variety of other things. As Will noted, Will's on his way to the Games for Change conference, which is video gaming focused on impact. So he'll be speaking there.
I
in New
think
York.
the question that maybe people want addressed, and they're not saying it specifically, but this is my thought process, is that with an independent film, the filmmaker owns the holding company. Whereas if for a television project, you're ultimately licensing it to a streamer. And so it goes from idea, to potentially being developed and produced immediately by a third party. And so the independent party is kind of taken out of the equation. And now you have the studio or streamer making all of the decisions. And in making those decisions, it could morph from a social impact project to not a social impact project. Is that something you've ever seen happen? Is that, am I over analyzing this?
No,
Being a lawyer, I tend to do that. So
what you're saying is absolutely true. I think, once again, if you're raising funds at that early stage of that television development project, and at least your intent is to do, is to cover an impactful area or raise awareness about something, once again, it's up to the donor or grantor to decide, do they want to support that? They can recognize that, hey, that may get swept away by a streaming network, and and the storyline may be changed, or, you know, things of that nature, but at least your upfront intention is to create that. That's true in film as well. I mean, you theoretically have control over that, but we all know once bigger money comes in, things can change dramatically. So the
But-
idea is, hey, look, at least the initial intent is around that, and this is a pathway to raise that early funding in the production.
But and I
So
think
is it up to them to-
Nina, in answer to your question, I think it depends on who winds up being the copyright owner in it. If you've raised all the money for a television series, for example, or whatever, or even deficit financed it, you know, in the end of the day, take comedy like Chuck Lorre. I mean, Chuck Lorre does a lot of what I would consider to be social impact entertainment, and so, you know, he has deals with Warner Brothers, and he's done things with Netflix as well. So it's not exclusively that way. A lot of this has to do with market power and the strength of the producer. So certain people are in a position where they have that leverage in the negotiations, but that's not universally true. What you're describing, smaller, more independent type producers, are they displaced or taken out of the equation in terms of the decision making? That's part of the negotiations that go on. But in terms of financing and what we're talking about putting together, if you're able to raise all the financing, then you can do licensing and distribution deals, but you don't have to lose control of your copyright and your ownership in whatever you're doing. Similarly, I mean, we've worked a lot. We helped to raise some of the money for the revival of the stage production of For Colored Girls that was about a year ago, that was brought back up on Broadway. So we've seen this sort of play out in a number of different ways in different media, and when Rick was mentioning, I am doing the thing at Games for Change, but there's a whole new world also an experiential thing, as you've seen with the Sphere, for example, in Las Vegas. But there's a whole world out there of dome entertainment and spheres and whatever that it is being tapped for different forms of storytelling. And then there again, that's it. Supporting those sorts of enterprises in other media is really just an extension of the theory where we're focused on film here, but it really works fairly nicely when you get into those other media.
So, again, the lawyer perspective is always concerned with disclosure to investors who are not familiar with how this impact investors, I should say, who are not familiar with how this business works. What is customary in terms of, what kind of disclosures have to be made about, hey, we're going to get this money, it may be used this way, that way. In the agreement with the donor, I presume that they have audit rights where they can see how the funds were spent. Tell us a little bit about what does that agreement look like with the donor?
Yeah, I mean, typically, no, there are no special things that you need to do to either raise or deploy philanthropic funds in your production. I mean, if it's being invested out of the nonprofit vehicle or out of the DAF, it's the same investment documents you're giving the nonprofit and the DAF that you would give any other investor. So there's no special dispensation, there's no additional administrative anything. And then with regard to the donor or grantor themselves, typically they're not getting any special rights. This is money they've often already set aside, or they're getting, if it's a new donation, they're getting a tax deduction, and that's often the beginning and the end of it. Now, what we would advise if it's major donors or grantors is that as the producer, that you share with them, you treat them like an investor, even though they sort of came through the donor grantor door. I mean, you provide them with the same information and visibility you would with other investors. But there's nothing required. There's no additional administrative burden. There's nothing that the philanthropic vehicle has to provide besides tax deduction documentation.
Excellent. We have about 9 minutes left. And so I wanted to see if there's any kind of, final takeaways from the presentation today. let's say you do have what we've defined as a social impact project, which now we know is very broad. It's much more than a documentary film. What would the next step be for a filmmaker? Making their list of financial advisors they should reach out to. Share with us, please.
I mean, largely, it's the same things you would have already been doing. I mean, you're talking about reaching out to individuals, probably high net worth type individuals or families that you are already raising money from. This is just giving you another set of questions you can ask them to reach into a pocket of funds they have that they probably didn't know they could use in this capacity. So largely, it's not a change from anything you would have already been doing. It's just an additional set of questions to be asking. There can be some additional things, like maybe this opens a door for you to reach out to some foundations and the like that you might not have been talking to otherwise. But largely, it's the same thing you're already doing in your fundraising activities. It's just reminding yourself don't forget to ask these additional questions. And to be able to sort of explain to those parties, hey, at this stage, it may be easier for you to participate in this way. I want to give you that opportunity. And then later, I'm going to circle back, and maybe you want to invest directly at a later stage in the production's development cycle.
So, for example, let's say somebody has a project about Alzheimer's, and they have a contact at the Alzheimer's Association. How would they approach them?
I mean, I would approach them by reaching out to the program officers, meaning the parties that make the grants, and say, I see where you're interested. I see what you're focused on. I'm doing something very much aligned with that. I'd love to talk about how you could make a grant to support my production. And by the way, I think it's going to be fantastically successful. If you'd like to have that grant money invested in the production, we can arrange that as well. And see if it gets a meeting, if nothing else. See if parties are interested.
Excellent.
I saw in the chat, one of the questions was if one has a production company, an LLC or an Inc., do they need to set up a nonprofit? And the answer is, we become that nonprofit. LOHAS sets that up for you. So you don't have to, one of the advantages of this is you don't have to do all the administrative work that's wrapped into the fee for setting this up in the first place. And all that administration, reporting to the IRS, the bookkeeping, all of that sort of thing is done by the administrator of the nonprofit that's created here. So you do not have to replicate that. This becomes the vehicle for that.
Excellent. Any other questions, Kyla, that came through the chat that could apply more broadly?
There was one that I saw. There was a question that said, is there a transaction or investment structure that would make these kinds of investments attractive for impact funds within the private equity or private credit space? Or is this really only relevant to donors or concessionary return investors?
So just to be clear, while we are an impact investing advisory firm, what we've been talking about today is specifically related to philanthropic type funding, tax deductible charitable funding, coming from DAFs, coming from foundations, coming from direct donations. So this is separate from parties that are actually making direct investments into productions. That's a different group. Clearly, those same parties can also do philanthropic funding, but if the question is related to structures that are most appealing to individual impact investors from a direct investment perspective, that's not what we've been covering today and talking about. Definitely want to clear up that confusion. This is about giving you another avenue to raise money from a different kind of source.
Mm-hmm. Another question that came up was that, well, we know that participant had recently closed, and someone was wondering how that recent closing was going to affect SIE financing, Or is that something that will make it less attractive, or does it really not have much an effect?
I can answer that. That I think that one of the things with participant closing is that everybody realizes that even social impact entertainment movies need to make money. There needs to be a financially sustainable model. And while participant had functioned for 20 years, operating with the support of Jeff Skoll and his substantial investment in it, it came to a point where it just was not sustainable that way and that he decided to go other ways with the Skoll Foundation. And therefore they closed it. And there was an open letter to the industry, and I'll put it into the chat, of a lot of people who basically weighed in and said, look, we're not giving up the fight. We're learning from the example of participant, and we're going to carry this forward, but we're going to do it with the understanding that there needs to be a profit aspect. There needs to be a commercial side to the business of social impact entertainment for it to be viable and sustainable on an individual project and an enterprise basis.
One other question that just came through that I think is worthy to raise here is, are you familiar with any document out there or website that actually has a list of projects that received DAF funds? We know that donors are anonymous, and we're not going to get access to that. But maybe there's a list that you're aware of films, TV shows that were actually financed via DAFs.
Well, and once again, it's not just DAFs. It could be foundation grants, could be direct contributions, anything in that vein. But at the beginning, Will mentioned Ava DuVernay's origin movie. That
Sure,
is
we're familiar with that
has
project.
turned into
Yeah.
that sort of poster child. Yeah, I mean, there's I don't know, Will, does the SIE Society discuss or promote movies that may have or productions of any kind that may have raised money through this pathway?
We haven't cataloged it in that way, but that's a sort of a work in progress with the hope to be able to share that sort of information.
Excellent. Awesome. So thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to share this information with our clients and colleagues. I think that you've dropped in the chat the website and some other information. If everyone wants to just take a minute, take screenshots.
Well, also, as Kyla noted, she's going to share the presentation, and there's a link at that end at the last slide that has actually a downloadable brochure for producers of SIE Productions that reiterates some of these same things, and includes those questions. So it's a little more portable, if you will, on the website. That might be an easy download for folks to make.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending, and get out there and find those donors.
Yeah, they're out there. You just have to ask the questions.
Yes. Thank you. We'll see everyone soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Nina. Glad we could participate.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.